The wind, a malevolent sculptor, had long since carved their faces into masks of hardened despair. Alara, barely 12 but aged decades by the gnawing hunger and relentless cold, stood amongst her 5 younger siblings, their small forms huddled like discarded kindling against the skeletal frame of the wagon. Its wheels, caked in mud and rust, were as dead as the hopes that flickered in their sunken eyes. Beside it, a mare, ribs protruding like the planks of a broken ship, shuddered with each ragged breath, its final moments echoing the fading light of their own existence. This, their pitiful inheritance, 6 children and a dying horse, was to be sold, parceled out to the highest bidder, a transaction as common and unfeeling as bartering for sacks of grain in this forgotten stretch of the Dakota Territory. The man who claimed guardianship, a gaunt, perpetually sour individual named Fisk, spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the parched earth. "They ain't worth much, mind you," he rasped, his voice sandpaper dry. "But they breathe, don't they? Good for field work, some of the boys. Girls, well, they'll fetch their price elsewhere." He gestured dismissively towards Alara and her sisters, his eyes holding the cold glint of a predator assessing its prey. Alara's hand instinctively tightened around the smallest, 5-year-old Lily, whose feverish cough was the only sound besides the wind's mournful howl. Fear, a familiar and bitter taste, coated Alara's tongue. She had promised their mother, on her dying breath, that she would protect them. But how does a sapling protect against a forest fire? Just as Fisk began to enumerate their meager virtues to a passing, curious rancher, a wagon, sturdier than any they had seen in years, creaked to a halt a few yards away. From it descended a man and a woman. The man, Elias Thorne, was broad-shouldered, with eyes that seemed to hold the quiet wisdom of the prairie itself, weathered like ancient stone. The woman, Maeve, was slight, her movements graceful, but her gaze, though gentle, was unyielding as it swept over the ragged assembly. Their presence was an anomaly, a splash of color in a monochrome world. They looked, not with judgment, but with a profound, almost aching sorrow. Fisk, sensing new potential buyers, straightened, his voice taking on a false geniality. "Good folks, just conducting a bit of business. Fine, healthy children, all of 'em, despite the dust. And a horse still got good years in her, just needs attention." He winked conspiratorially, gesturing to the failing mare. Elias said nothing, his eyes fixed on Alara, then on the trembling children behind her. Maeve, meanwhile, stepped closer, her gaze lingering on Lily, her brow furrowed with a concern that cut through Alara's icy resolve. "How many are there?" Maeve asked, her voice soft, yet clear, like a mountain spring. "6, Fisk stated, puffing out his chest. "6 souls ripe for the picking. While you give for them. Or just a few. The big one, she's strong, takes care of the others." "Hard worker," he pointed at Alara. Alara bristled, her chin lifting, a silent defiance in her gaze. She was not a commodity. She was a shield. But her defiance was a fragile thing, easily shattered by the reality of their situation. Elias finally spoke, his voice low, resonant, silencing the wind for a moment. "We'll take them all." Fisk's jaw dropped. The rancher grunted in surprise. Alara's own breath caught. Maeve's eyes, bright with unshed tears, met Alara's, a silent promise passing between them. "And the horse?" Elias added, his gaze flicking to the dying mare. "She comes with them." Fisk, still reeling, quickly recovered, seeing a larger profit. A grim negotiation followed, brief and to the point. The sum exchanged was more than Alara could have imagined. As Elias counted out the gold, a wave of dizzying relief, mixed with profound terror, washed over Alara. Their lives, previously mapped out in lines of despair, had veered sharply onto an unknown path. Elias turned to them, his expression unreadable. "Gather your things," he instructed, his voice not unkind but firm. "We're leaving." There was nothing to gather, only themselves. As they climbed into the Thorns' wagon, Alara glanced back at Fisk, a small, triumphant flame flickering in her heart. They were free, but for how long? and what new prison awaited them. The first days of their journey with Elias and Maeve Thorne were a blur of rattling wheels, an unceasing wind, and the relentless, gnawing uncertainty that was as much a part of the landscape as the dust. The Thorpe's wagon, though sturdier, offered little comfort against the biting cold. Alara kept her siblings tightly packed around her, their small bodies a fragile huddle of fear and exhaustion. Lily's cough persisted, a rattling counterpoint to the creak of the wagon and the mournful whine of the wind. The dying mare, surprisingly, still clung to life, stumbling along behind them on a lead, each step an agony, a living testament to their own precarious existence. Alara watched it, her heart a tight knot, seeing herself and her siblings in its struggle. Her eyes, sharp and wary, rarely left Elias. He was a man of few words, his attention fixed on the horizon, his hands steady on the reins. He seemed carved from the same unforgiving stone as the land, unreadable, impenetrable. Maeve was different. She moved with a quiet grace, her hands quick and gentle as she smoothed a blanket over a sleeping child or offered a sliver of dried meat. She didn't press, didn't demand. She simply was there, a soft presence in a harsh world. Yet, Alara remained distrustful. Kindness, in her experience, always came with a price. She searched for the hooks, the hidden motives behind their sudden, inexplicable generosity. Why them? Why all of them? They were a burden, 6 mouths to feed, 6 bodies to clothe. No one offered such a gift without expecting something in return, something precious. One evening, as the sun bled orange and purple across the vast, empty sky, the mare finally faltered. It collapsed, a heavy thud against the earth, its breath a shallow whisper. Alara watched, a lump forming in her throat. This was it. The last thread connecting them to their past, a frail and dying thread, was about to snap. Elias dismounted, his face grim. He knelt beside the mare, his hand gently stroking its matted flank. Maeve came to stand beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. They shared a silent glance, a conversation in their eyes that Alara couldn't decipher. Then Elias stood, retrieved a rifle from the wagon, and with a swift, merciful shot, ended the mare's suffering. The sound echoed across the desolate plains, sharp and final. Alara flinched, pulling Lily closer. Her other siblings began to whimper. Elias then turned, his gaze meeting Alara's. There was no apology, no explanation, just a quiet, solemn understanding. He had ended the suffering. A strange, unexpected respect flickered within Alara. He did what needed to be done, without fanfare, without hesitation. Later, as Elias dug a shallow grave for the mare, Maeve sat beside Alara, offering a tin cup of steaming coffee, its warmth seeping into Alara's frozen fingers. "It was merciful, child," Maeve said, her voice soft, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "Sometimes, the kindest thing is to release what cannot be saved." Alara nodded, mute. She understood that mercy, in this unforgiving world, was a luxury rarely afforded. Yet these two strangers had offered it not just to a dying animal but to them. That night, as the cold seeped into their bones, Alara saw Maeve pull a worn, patched quilt from a trunk and carefully drape it over the sleeping children. Then, to Alara's astonishment, she placed another, thicker one over Alara herself, her fingers brushing Alara's hair. "Sleep, child," Maeve whispered, her voice gentle as a lullaby. "You're safe now." Alara closed her eyes, the words echoing in her mind. Safe. The concept was foreign, fragile, like a butterfly wing. But for the first time in a very long time, the knot in her stomach eased, just a fraction. The journey was long, but perhaps, just perhaps, it led somewhere other than another dead end. The Thorns' homestead emerged from the vast, empty plains like a small, stubborn declaration of defiance against the wilderness. A simple cabin, built of sturdy logs, with a wisp of smoke curling from its stone chimney. It promised shelter, warmth, and an unfamiliar sense of permanence. Elias had chosen a clearing near a winding creek, its banks lined with cottonwoods, offering a splash of green in the muted landscape. Their arrival was met not with celebration, but with a quiet, almost reverent awe from the children. This was not a stopping point, but a home. The idea was daunting, exhilarating. Alara, however, remained on guard. Old habits died hard. She continued to act as a sentinel, her gaze sweeping over the cabin's interior, assessing its vulnerabilities, its escape routes. It was clean, sparsely furnished, but held the scent of wood smoke, dried herbs, and something else, a quiet peace that Alara hadn't known existed. Maeve, true to her nature, began to weave them into the fabric of the home with gentle, deliberate actions. She showed them how to draw water from the well, how to tend the small garden, how to help with simple chores. She did not command, but invited participation, her patience boundless. The younger children, starved for affection and stability, clung to her, their initial fear slowly melting into tentative trust. Lily, her cough now blessedly softer, would often trail Maeve, her small hand clutching the hem of Maeve's worn skirt. Elias, for his part, worked from dawn till dusk. He repaired fences, chopped wood, mended tools, his movements efficient and tireless. He rarely spoke, but his presence was a steady, immovable anchor. Alara watched him, fascinated by his silent competence. He was a provider not out of duty imposed by a cruel world, but by choice. One afternoon, as a sudden, torrential downpour lashed against the cabin, a gust of wind ripped a shutter from its hinges, sending a shower of splinters across the floor. Panic flared in Alara. Her instinct was to protect her siblings from the broken glass and the driving rain. Before she could move, Elias was there, his large frame blocking the opening, shielding them. He worked quickly, efficiently, securing a temporary board over the gap, his face grim with concentration. He didn't utter a single curse or word of frustration, only the soft scrape of wood against wood. As he finished, he glanced at Alara, whose knuckles were white from clenching her fists. "No harm done, Alara," he said, his voice quiet, almost reassuring. "We'll fix it proper tomorrow." It was the first time he had spoken directly to her, and the simple statement, devoid of judgment or expectation, was a balm. Alara found herself nodding, a strange sense of relief washing over her. She was not alone in this fight for survival anymore. They were a team. Later that evening, Maeve, seeing the tension still etched on Alara's face, approached her with a small, worn book. It was a collection of pressed wildflowers, each one carefully labeled in elegant script. "My mother taught me to read from this," Maeve said, her voice soft. "Perhaps you would like to learn?" Alara, who had always yearned for knowledge but never had the luxury, felt a tremor of emotion. She took the book, her fingers tracing the delicate petals. It was a gesture of profound trust, an offering of a future beyond mere existence. As Maeve began to point to the letters, slowly, painstakingly, Alara felt something within her begin to uncoil. The burden of being solely responsible for her siblings had been immense. Here, in this quiet, sturdy home, under the patient guidance of these gentle strangers, she was slowly, tentatively, learning to be a child again, and perhaps something more. The seeds of belonging, once scattered on the wind, were finally beginning to take root. The quiet sanctuary of the Thorns homestead, however, was not impenetrable. News traveled slowly in the vast plains, but malice, like a persistent rumor, often found its way. One blustery afternoon, as Elias was mending a broken fence post and Maeve was teaching the younger children to churn butter, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, rapidly approaching. Alara, her senses honed by years of hardship, felt an instinctive prickle of dread. It was Fisk, the gaunt man who had sought to sell them, and with him 2 other rough-looking men, their faces etched with suspicion and greed. They reined their horses hard, sending dust swirling around the cabin. Fisk's eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on Alara and her siblings. "Heard tell you acquired some property, Thorn?" he sneered, his gaze flicking contemptuously towards Maeve. "Children ain't meant to be kept like cattle. Some folks say it ain't right." And a man of the cloth, passing through, He might have questions about 6 extra mouths without proper paperwork. The threat hung in the air, thick and rancid. He was implying impropriety, perhaps even kidnapping, attempting to exploit the era's loose laws and social prejudices. His true motive, Ilera knew, was the money he now regretted letting slip through his fingers. Elias stepped forward, his posture unwavering, his hands resting lightly on his hips. "These children are under my care, Fisk, and they are not property." His voice was low, resonant, imbued with a quiet authority that brooked no argument. Maeve, meanwhile, moved instinctively to gather the younger children behind her, shielding them, her gaze firm and unwavering as she met Fisk's aggressive stare. Ilera, however, did not retreat. A new strength, forged in the quiet safety of the Thorns' home, had bloomed within her. She stepped out from behind Maeve, her chin lifted, her gaze meeting Fisk's with an intensity that surprised even him. "We chose to come here," she stated, her voice clear and steady, belying her young age. "We chose to be with the Thorns. They gave us a home, not a price." Her words hung in the air, a stark declaration of agency. Fisk blinked, taken aback by her unexpected defiance. He hadn't expected the property to speak, to have a will of its own. One of his companions took a step forward, his hand drifting to a knife at his belt, but Elias's eyes, now like flint, hardened. "I suggest you leave, Fisk," Elias said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying the weight of an unspoken warning. "And do not return." The implicit threat, carried in Elias's stillness and the unwavering depth of his gaze, was unmistakable. Fisk, seeing the resolve in Elias, the silent strength in Maeve, and the newfound defiance in Ilera, hesitated. He was a bully accustomed to easy prey. This family, though recently formed, was not easy prey. They were united. With a final, contemptuous sneer, Fisk turned his horse, his companions reluctantly following suit. The cloud of dust they left behind was quickly dispersed by the ever-present wind, leaving behind only the profound silence of the plains. Ilera watched them go, her heart pounding, but not with fear, with something akin to triumph. She turned back to Elias and Maeve, a deep, unspoken gratitude in her eyes. Elias met her gaze, a rare, almost imperceptible nod passing between them. Maeve reached out, her hand gently cupping Ilera's cheek. "You were very brave, my dear," she whispered, her eyes shining with pride. In that moment, the last vestiges of fear and the burden of her past fell away. Ilera was no longer merely a survivor, a protector of lost children. She was a daughter, a part of something larger, a testament to the transformative power of compassion and belonging. The children were no longer orphans, but a family, their laughter soon echoing through the cabin. A joyous symphony against the vast, indifferent land. The future would undoubtedly bring new challenges, but they would face them together. Elias and Maeve, the childless couple, had not merely bought 6 souls. They had sown the seeds of hope, cultivating a dignity and resilience that would flourish against the harsh prairie, creating a home where love, not sorrow, now reigned supreme.